Hi and welcome back to the ezJavascript introduction series. This is the second video in the series where we're going to start by creating this application that builds out the scene tree for us. So just to give you a reminder of what we're going to do, I'm going to get rid of the container over here and I'm going to run our code again, and this is going to build out the scene tree based on our JSON definition in our code over here. Alright, so let's get rid of everything, and you know what, I'm going to add a new container first, and let's grab this, and I'm going to get rid of our old code and start from scratch. So the first thing we want to do when building out this application is create our JSON definition. This is going to be the starting point of the whole script, is to define our scene tree. So let's go ahead and create a new variable called tree, and this is going to be a JSON object. And I have a definition I'm just going to copy and paste that I created already to save some time. So we're going to start with something very simple. We're going to start off with a name property. This is going to be the name of our container. We're going to only have one container for now. Later on we're going to add more and have a nested tree. But for now we're just going to start with one container. We're going to set the name and we're going to set the position of that container. So this is our JSON definition. The next thing I want to do is I want to create our main function. That's basically going to be the starting point of this code. So I'm going to create a new function, and I'm going to call this build tree. It's going to build our scene tree. I'm going to pass it two variables. The first one is going to be the root, and the second one will be the node. Okay, so I've created my first function in ezJavascript. So the first thing I want to do is get the container, the main container that our script is currently on, and this is everything is going to be built underneath this container. So let's create a new variable called target, and this is going to be the root container. This is what we get over here. So as you can see, if I hit root, root will be a container, but I don't have the autocomplete options for a container object because I haven't defined this as a container. And in JavaScript we can define this, which makes it very easy and helpful. So I'm going to do that right now. So we just add that in, and we write @param, and we pass it the type that we want. So this is going to be container, and the variable that we're going to use is going to be root. Okay, so now I've defined for this function the root variable as a container, and when I move my mouse over, you can now see that in this little hint that I have in the editor, it says that root is a container. So now I can go back to my code and say root dot, and now I have all the options, the parameters and functions of a container inside the autocomplete menu over here. So that's very, very helpful. So what I want to do is add a container. So I'm going to say root.add, and the next thing we need to do is define the position. You can see that when I've add the add function here, a little hint tells me that I need to provide it one property to this function, which is the where I want to add the container, and it's of type tree position. So if I go back to our help documentation, and I'm going to type in here tree position, you can see that a tree position has three values: next, previous, and down. So make sure to always reference the documentation if you're unsure of anything. So in this add function, I can write tree position dot down, and that's going to create a new container as a child of my root container. Okay, so the next thing we need to do, we now have target is going to be our new container that we're adding. The next thing I need to do is add the different properties of that container. So I'm going to create a new function. Let's go ahead and define the function first before we use it. So I'm going to call this function set generic. So I'm going to set generic properties of the container. And what I'm going to be passing into this function, we're going to define in 1 second. I'm going to pass it 3 different properties. So the first one will be the target. This is going to be the container that we want to change. And then next I'm going to pass it the data. This is going to be the data from our tree, from our JSON definition. And the last one is name. This is going to be the property that I want to set. So inside this function, it's going to be pretty simple. I'm going to check that inside our data object we have the property that we're looking for. So that will be from the name variable over there. And if we do, I'm going to set it on the target. Property will be set from the data object. Okay, and that pretty much finishes that function for us. We can now go ahead and use it in our main build tree function. So there's 2 things I want to set here. So I'm going to use this function twice. Set generic, and I'm going to pass it the target. Again, this is going to be our container, our new container that we just created over here. I want to pass it the node. So this will be received from here, from the basically our JSON definition that we're passing into this function. And then I want to pass it the property that I want to change. So first one is set the name of the container. So you can see that inside our JSON definition we have the name property, and that's what we're going to pass to the generic set generic function to set the name of our container. The second thing I want to do is set the container to active. So set generic, again target, this will be the node, and we want to set the active property. Okay, so if I just close this and go ahead and run this code, nothing's going to happen except that our script compiled successfully. That means we don't have any syntax errors, but nothing was actually added to our scene tree. And that's because we never actually called any of our functions. We defined them, but we never called them. So the next thing we need to do is call the function. So right at the end here, I'm going to say call my build tree function, and I need to pass it 2 properties. So the first one is going to be container. Container is the current container that our plugin, the ezJavascript plugin is on. So in this example, it's on the group container, and that's what I'm passing it here. And I need to pass it our JSON definition. So I'm going to pass the tree variable. The last thing I need to do is I need to tell Viz to update the scene tree when once we finish building the tree. So I'm going to say scene dot update scene tree, and that's a function. And now I can go ahead and run the code. And there you see, we now have a new child container called top container, which is what we defined in our scene tree. So if I run this code again, watch what happens. It's going to add another child. That's not the behavior we want. We have to tell Viz to remove the children before we build the tree again. So in my code, before I build the tree, I'm going to call the container again, and I'm going to say delete children. So now if I run my code, it will remove any children that were before, and it's going to create the new containers for us. So now we can change this, for example, to first container and hit run. And now we have a new container called first container in our scene tree. Great. So the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to set the position properties of that container. So for this, I'm going to create another function, and I'm going to call this set vertex. Okay, because a position properties in Viz are vertexes, which are 3 numbers. So I'm going to just add the Z property to my JSON definition over here. I'm just going to set the Z position to 0. And in the set vertex, I'm going to pass it the target and the data. Okay, so inside this function, I'm first going to make sure that just do some error checking. So make sure that the data is passed. So if it's not passed, I'm just going to return this function and not do anything. This will make sure we don't get any runtime errors if the data object is not passed to this function. If we do have the data, then we can go ahead and set the values. So if we have data x, okay, so this would be this value over here. So if it's been set and it exists, then we can say target dot x equals data dot x. And I'm going to do this for the y position and the z position. So let's just change these. And for the y position as well. Okay, and that is that function done. So now we can go back to our build tree function, and we can say set vertex, and we need to provide it the target property that we want to change. So this will be target. Remember, target is our new container that we're about to create, and I want to change the position properties, and I'm going to pass the data is node.position. Right? Remember, this is our JSON structure. We're passing it the position properties. So before I run this code, let's just have a look at what was created earlier. You can see that this container that we created earlier, the position x, y, and z are all set to 0. So now I've implemented the position properties from our JSON object, and I can go ahead and hit run. This will recreate the scene structure, and if we now look at the container, you can see that the position x is set to 10 and position y is set to 100. If we look at our JSON definition, that matches what we defined over here. And we can do the same, for example, if we want to set the rotation as well. So for rotation, I'm going to add a new object to my JSON definition. And let's just go ahead and copy these values. And I'm going to set the x and y rotation to 0. And the z rotation, let's make it 100. Now I need to go back to the build function and add the rotation handling over here. So I'm going to use the vertex set vertex function again, because the rotation is a vertex as well. But instead of passing the position properties, I'm going to pass the rotation. So rotation properties. Now if I hit run, we look at our container, you can see that the position properties have been set and the rotation properties Z100, and that's what we defined in our JSON. Thanks for watching. This is going to bring us the end of this video. Thanks for watching. In the next video, we're going to cover adding geometry to our container. So we're going to add a rectangle, and we're going to, in the rest of the series, we're going to also add the nested subchildren and add some function plugins as well, like autofollow or control object. So be sure to check those out. Thanks for watching.